The Jets add 3 players off waivers, and 2 of them could be immediate contributors. Locked On Jets begins now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, August 28th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And our episode today is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. We have a busy show today, a lot to talk about. The Jets added 3 players, they lost 4 players, and they started building their practice squad. We're going to get to all of that on today's show. And we will begin by talking about the 3 new additions to the New York Jets roster. The Jets added 3 players on waiver claims yesterday. So just a quick refresher, the way the NFL works is that players cut at the end of training camp who have less than 4 years of experience are subject to the waiver process. And essentially what that means is if you have less than 4 years of experience in the NFL and you're cut at the end of training camp, all 31 teams can say, I want this guy. And if you do that, you get him. You get his full contract. It's like trading for a player and giving up nothing in return. The 3 players the Jets added were tight end Jelani Woods from the Colts, linebacker Cam Jones from the Chiefs, and another member of the Kansas City Chiefs, offensive tackle Esa Pole. So let's start by talking about the guy who I think will have the biggest immediate impact, and that is the tight end from Indianapolis, Jelani Woods. And I think the Jets may have made a little history yesterday in claiming Jelani Woods, because at the end of yesterday's show, Jelani Woods was a player I named that should interest the Jets in the waiver wire. I said, this is a guy the Jets should go out and get. This may be the first time in recorded history the Jets have actually taken my advice on something. Normally, the Jets do the exact opposite of what I want them to do. But I think Jelani Woods is a guy who should upgrade the tight end room for the New York Jets. The group they have right now, lots of question marks around it. There is a talented rookie in Mason Taylor, but you don't even really know what you're going to get from Mason Taylor in year one. You have to remember he missed part of training camp with a high ankle sprain, and tight end is a notoriously difficult position for rookies to master. After that, you've got Andrew Beck, who kind of a fullback tight end hybrid, who I think has looked promising. I think has looked like a good blocker during the exhibition season. So maybe there's some upside there. You also have Stone Smart, who's a converted quarterback from college, who had one moment in preseason, a 24-yard touchdown on the screen against the New York Giants. And then you got Jeremy Ruckert, who is still here and has not really developed at all. So lots of question marks at the tight end position. I'm not going to tell you Jelani Woods is not also a question mark, but he's a different type of question mark. He had a very strong season in 2022 with the Colts. Looked like a decent blocker, added some production in the receiving game. And then 2023, 2024 came, and he missed both seasons because of injuries. He suffered a hamstring injury in 2023 that never really got better. Then in 2024, there was a turf toe injury. So it's fair to say that Woods is injury prone. When you miss 2 full seasons due to soft tissue injuries, you're not really sure how much you're going to get out of a player. But he came back in 2025 and in the exhibition season played very strong. And by all accounts, just kind of got caught up in a numbers game in Indianapolis. They have a very strong tight end room led by the first round pick Tyler Warren out of Penn State. So it doesn't really sound like anything that Jelani Woods did wrong led to his release. It was just they had too many guys. It was kind of like the Jets cornerback room this year with Jarrick Bernard-Converse, who we'll talk about in a little bit. Bernard-Converse didn't really do anything wrong. It was just the Jets had too many guys in there. They had Sauce Gardner. They had the free agent Brandon Stevens. The third round pick is Arieh Thomas. They had Michael Carter II, and they decided to go with Quantez Stiggers. It's kind of a similar dynamic here. I don't think it's outlandish to believe that Jelani Woods is the best tight end on the roster right now for the New York Jets. Now, I think in the long run, Mason Taylor may overtake him, but today, Jelani Woods might be the Jets' top tight end. So he will take some time probably to get up to speed on the playbook, get comfortable playing with Justin Fields. I would not be at all surprised if Jelani Woods was tight end 1 sooner rather than later for this team. The second guy the Jets were awarded, Cam Jones. So he's a linebacker, but really what he is a special teamer. He's viewed as a special teams ace. The last 2 years with the Kansas City Chiefs, he has played 2/3 of the snaps. So he will be a backup, at the linebacker position. There's no question about that. If the Jets suffer some injuries, you could see Cam Jones at the linebacker position. But he wasn't really brought in for that. He was brought in to help on the coverage units. He was brought in to help other aspects of special teams. He was brought in to, kind of play one of those roles. And I think that this is like the area where you can actually really help your team on the waiver wire. In an ideal world, you get like a Quincy Williams who becomes a first team All-Pro, or you get a John Franklin Myers who becomes a quality starter at an important position. But in reality, you're kind of more tinkering on your team around the edges. You're trying to just find little areas where you can upgrade. There are not a lot of starters who are available in the waiver wire. What there are depth pieces, guys who are role players, and somebody who plays special teams at a high level, like a Cam Jones, that could help out your roster. And one thing we've seen for this new Jets regime is they do value special teams play. That's a consideration when they decide those bottom of the roster spots. And it's very logical for that, because the guys at the bottom of your roster usually are not going to see much time on the field at their natural position on offense or defense unless you suffer a bunch of injuries. So you use those spots to really improve your special teams. And special teams play can decide games. This is a league where over half the games are decided by one score or less. So little special teams play, a little play that, play a tackle here that flips field position, a big return. These are the types of things that can swing a one-score game. So it's important to think about these things as you build your roster. And the final player the Jets added, who was actually the player who may have generated the most buzz yesterday in the Jets fan base, Esa Pole. He's a tackle from the Kansas City Chiefs. He was an undrafted free agent signing out of Washington State this year. Chiefs fans were apparently very upset to lose him. In the preseason, he allowed no pressures in 49 pass blocking snaps and did not commit a penalty in 68 snaps. Now, those numbers should tell you a lot. I mean, those 49 snaps is not a lot. It's very good that you did not allow a pressure in 49 snaps. Very good that you did not commit a penalty in 68 snaps. But that doesn't really tell us a whole lot about Esa Pole. Now, look, it's better than playing poorly, and I think that this is certainly a guy worth a look as a developmental player at the tackle position. But I think that this is a player we might want to take a reasonable approach looking at. This is a guy who was a UDFA signing. The Chiefs did let him go at the end of the preseason, which, look, sometimes you can find a quality player off the waiver wire. You got to have some developmental tackles in your building. You always got to try and develop offensive linemen. Pule, he's got the build of a guy who can play offensive line in the NFL. This is not, a Max Mitchell situation where you look at him and you wonder whether the guy's got the physical tools to play in this league. It's going to be a question of development. I think these preseason games are very difficult to judge linemen individually because you're always shuffling the offensive line. You're throwing new guys in and out, and they're also not facing the highest caliber competition. Those are all factors that come into play. I think Pule is a guy, again, worth watching. I think he's certainly a guy that was worth claiming. He's worth a guy he's worth trying to develop. I'm not sure he's going to be this superstar lineman that he's being portrayed as. I mean, I've seen a million Jets preseason stars who got claimed by some other team, and the fan base is convinced that the Jets just threw away a star, and more often than not, it doesn't really pan out because it's a waiver claim. But Pule, we'll see what he can do. I'm not ruling out that he could develop into somebody decent, but I think we're still a really long way from Esa Pule becoming a player in this league. And hopefully he will. Now, you're on the Locked On Jets podcast. Well, to add 3 players, the Jets had to make some changes to their roster. 3 players were cut from the Jets roster, and 1 player was lost on waivers. We'll break down who the Jets lost, and none of them were really big deals. We'll explain why as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. Preseason is already heating up, and college football is not far behind. Whether you've got your eye on big-name quarterbacks or breakout running backs, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in on the game. PrizePicks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you get your picks right, you could cash in and win up to 2,000 times your money. The flex play option is a total game changer. Even when one of your picks misses, you still can double your money. PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Lots of moves after cut down day, waiver claims made, players lost. The Jets added 3 players on waiver claims on Wednesday, but that meant that they needed to cut 3 guys to make space on the roster. The Jets also lost 1 player on waiver claims, and that it was not a big surprise. The player the Jets lost was Jarrick Bernard-Converse, a cornerback who had a very, very strong preseason for this team. I talked a bit about him in the first segment, but I think for JBC, what it came down to was a numbers game. The Jets just did not feel like they had a spot for him. Sauce Gardner's obviously a superstar. The Jets just signed Brandon Stevens and gave him a pretty big contract in free agency. Michael Carter II's a starter. Azareye'h Thomas was their third-round pick this year. So it came down to 2 players for 1 spot. It was Jarrick Bernard-Converse versus Quantez Stiggers. Now, I think Bernard-Converse is a much stronger cover guy at this point. But I think the Jets valued special teams. Going back to what I said in the first segment about the player the Jets added from Kansas City, Cam Jones. When you're talking about like bottom of the roster spots, when you're talking about the number 5 cornerback, we're not really discussing somebody who's going to be on the field all that much on the defensive side of the ball. Unless there are multiple injuries, Quantez Stiggers is not going to be at the corner position. But the points where Quantez Stiggers can get on the field come on special teams. And because Quantez Stiggers is a better special teamer than JBC, I think that's why he got the nod. It was a tough break for Jarrick Bernard-Converse because I don't really know what else he could have done. He was outstanding in coverage. He's shown himself to be a good tackler. I think he deserves a chance somewhere in the NFL. So, I'm happy that the Cleveland Browns were able to get him. Do I think Jarrick Bernard-Converse is going to go on to be a starter in this league? I doubt it. I think that despite everything I just said, if the Jets really believed JBC was a future starter in this league, they would have held on to him because I think holding on to a future starter supersedes special teams. I think special teams is more important than, being a better cover guy as a number 5 corner. But I think if you have big potential, you hold on to a player. I would question why the Jets, did what they did at some spots on the roster. Why would you keep maybe a Max Mitchell over Jarrick Bernard-Converse? That's an open question. There are some spots where the Jets are so weak that maybe keeping 1 less player would have made sense. But I don't think that there should be at this point a lot of tears over Jarrick Bernard-Converse because first of all, he's going to a place where he's going to get an opportunity. And second of all, it's unlikely, despite what we saw in the preseason, he was doing that against guys who are not starters in this league. So I think it's possible he could be a good depth player. I would say it's unlikely that he was a secret superstar hiding in plain sight for us. This is an opportunity for him. It felt unlikely the Jets were going to be able to get him to the practice squad. So Jarrick Bernard-Converse, now a member of the Cleveland Browns. The Jets did have to clear out 3 roster spots in order to make room for the 3 guys that they claimed. So first guy who was cut was Tyler Johnson, a wide receiver. And this has created a little minor stir in the fan base because people thought Johnson was going to be part of the offense. I mean, Johnson's a 5-year veteran who has never really produced at any appreciable rate. And I saw some people were upset that, the Jets got rid of Johnson instead of Xavier Gipson. Gibson's rookie year was very Johnson-esque. I mean, I'm not going to defend Xavier Gipson continuing to be on this roster, but if the question is whether Xavier Gipson or Tyler Johnson should keep a roster spot, I think that there's no right or wrong answer there. I think the 2 players are roughly of equal caliber. And Johnson did end up getting signed to the practice squad. There was some speculation yesterday that this may have just been a short-term move because as a veteran, if Johnson's on the week 1 roster, his salary becomes fully guaranteed for the season. Whereas if the Jets sign him after week 1, they don't have to guarantee his salary. So this may just be like a short-term accounting move for the Jets, but I don't think Johnson really brings a lot to the table. I think the Jets wide receiver room's got issues. I mentioned that yesterday, but I think clearing out Johnson is logical because there's really no use for Johnson on a team where you already have Josh Reynolds and Allen Lazard. These are you already have your quota of veteran receivers who don't really have a lot of skills, but at least bring an understanding of how to read coverages and understanding of where to be at most of the times. Not guys who are going to beat corners one-on-one. That's what Johnson does, and that's I think Lazard and Reynolds already bring that to the table. So I don't think that there's any great loss there. Next guy the Jets cut, Zaire Barnes. This was only surprising from the standpoint nobody was expecting Zaire Barnes to be on the initial 53-man roster. Barnes, the backup linebacker, late round pick a couple of years ago, who really has not shown a lot of ability to become a quality linebacker in this league. Did play quite a bit on special teams, but he seemed like the natural guy to go when the Jets got a guy like Cam Jones, because Cam Jones is essentially Zaire Barnes' role. He's a backup linebacker, but his main duty on the team is playing on special teams. So Zaire Barnes became superfluous, and it felt like Zaire Barnes was always on borrowed time. When you're the late round pick of the previous regime and you haven't really developed, odds are you're going to be off the team sooner rather than later. And I think that Cam Jones will be to Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji what Zaire Barnes was to Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas. And I don't mean that as that probably came off as strange, but I think Barnes to Saleh and Joe Douglas was a solid backup who can really help the team on special teams. And I think that to Glenn and Muji, that's what Cam Jones will be. So that was the second player that the Jets waived on Wednesday. The third player was Marquise Hayes. And if you needed to look up who Marquise Hayes was, you're not alone. I don't think this was a guy who was very well known in the Jets fan base. And I think that when their roster came out on Wednesday afternoon and you saw Hayes as an offensive lineman, your first response might have been, who? Well, Hayes was a 7th-round pick by Arizona back in 2022, played with the Cardinals up until last year when they let him go, bounced around a couple of practice squads. The Jets signed him back in June. But he actually had a decent exhibition season. But this is a guy who never really found a spot in the league. And I think that this was clearly the guy who lost his spot to Pole. And I think if the question is, would I rather have Pole or would I rather have Hayes? The answer is going to be Pole, because Pole is a guy, again, who has less experience. And I think sometimes when you have less experience, that means there's more time to develop. There's more runway. I mean, Hayes is a guy who's been in the NFL since 2022 and never really made his mark. I think at some point, as a developmental player, if you don't show signs of development, you're not going to develop. Pole has a long runway in front of him. And for Pole, there hasn't been much. I mean, there's been, 68 preseason snaps. But the 68 preseason snaps look pretty good. That's a good basis to start trying to develop into a player in this league. So Hayes, next one out the door. I think there was some surprise it wasn't Max Mitchell, but I don't know that Hayes is all that much better than Max Mitchell. The Jets needed to get rid of one lineman to make room for Pole, and it ends up being Hayes. Now, you're on the Locked On Jets podcast. The Jets began building their practice squad. So a lot of familiar names are joining the practice squad. There was one big surprise, though, at a role on this team that has some degree of importance. We'll talk about what that is as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options have not worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. It's completely online. Rugiet connects you with a board-certified doctor and ships your treatment discreetly to your door. You can even read real customer reviews on their site. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to Sundays. FanDuel fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. Jet season coming up. If you want to get in on the action, FanDuel is the place to be. You can also do baseball. So many sports to bet on. FanDuel is the place to be. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Thursday. Jets roster starting to take shape, and the practice squad starting to take shape. Yesterday was the first day that teams could start signing players to their practice squad. And you're going to see a lot of familiar names on the Jets practice squad because mostly your practice squad is filled out by players you cut. So let's talk about some of the notable names the Jets have brought onto their practice squad. The biggest one that I thought was a surprise was they signed Brady Cook to the practice squad, which means that Brady Cook will be the third quarterback. And Adrian Martinez, who was the other guy in the competition for the third quarterback, ends up signing with the San Francisco 49ers. So Cook is now the number 3 quarterback on this team. And I have to say, I'm not sure I understand that. I don't know how the Jets watched that preseason and thought Brady Cook was a guy who was a strong contender to be the number 3 quarterback. I mean, he did not look good. He did not look like an NFL caliber quarterback. I mean, look at the last preseason game against the Philadelphia Eagles. He was playing against pretty much a practice squad level defense and led the Jets to 3 points in one half. A guy who really was hesitant to push the ball down the field, a guy who was not reading coverages particularly well, a guy who was not really aggressive. This was against practice squad level players. I'm not sure he has the physical tools to succeed in this league. I know number 3 quarterbacks aren't really going to be very good. I know that especially developmental guys are not going to be finished products, but tough to see where the Jets see the upside in Brady Cook. I thought, not that I think Martinez is really not that I think Adrian Martinez is like going to be some dynamic quarterback, but I thought Martinez was clearly the better of the two. And if you were going to stay internally with one of the two options, it should have been Martinez. I don't know. Maybe another move is coming at the quarterback position because I find it tough to believe the Jets are going to be comfortable with Brady Cook as the number 3 quarterback this year. The other name that may have been familiar to you fans who watched the preseason, Jets kept kicker Harrison Mevis on their practice squad. Now, I'm not sure how good Mevis is, but I think that with the expanded practice squads, because now we're up to 17 players. The league recently added a 17th spot, which goes to an international player. But these are not the days of the 5-player practice squads. These are not the days of the 8-player practice squads. Now we're up to 17 players. And with 17 spots on the practice squad, I think it makes sense to keep a backup kicker there. Because people who are part of special teams in the NFL will tell you that there is a certain amount of rhythm, there's a certain amount of chemistry to the connection between a long snapper, a holder, and a kicker. And I think it's good that you'll have a backup kicker there. If something happens to Nick Folk, you'll have somebody there who's got experience working with your long snapper and your holder. You won't need to adjust this stuff on the fly. Now, of course, you've got professionals in the NFL. You see guys signed off the street all the time in season who come in and do a good job as a kicker if there's an injury. But I think if you can avoid that dynamic, if you can get a kicker who's comfortable working with your battery, your long snapper and your holder, that's a positive thing for your team. There were also a couple young receivers, Quentin Skinner and Jamal Pritchett, who were signed to the practice squad. On yesterday's show, one of the things I mentioned was I thought the Jets should have kept either Skinner or Pritchett instead of Tyler Johnson or Xavier Gibson. the fact that Skinner and Pritchard are on the practice squad, okay, I guess that alleviates some of my frustration, although I still think this Jets wide receiver room should not have Lazard, uh, Reynolds, and Gibson all together. I think the Jets should still be trying to find a little bit more upside at the wide receiver position. They were not awarded any players on waiver claims yesterday. We'll keep our eye out to see whether they bring in a new wide receiver before the start of the season. But a couple of young receivers who flashed in the exhibition season earned a spot on the practice squad. So there's another guy I really liked, Dean Clark, the safety. I was kind of pulling for Dean Clark to get a roster spot. I thought he played really well in the preseason for quite a long stretch there. But Dean Clark ends up on the practice squad, and that's a spot for him to get some more reps, really get get comfortable with this Aaron Glenn defense, and perhaps learn a bit. As we mentioned, Tyler Johnson on the practice squad. I think the practice squad's a better spot for Tyler Johnson than the active roster. I mean, I don't think the Jets need all these wide receivers who are veterans, who are, kind of depth players. That's really what Tyler Johnson is. Tyler Johnson's been in the NFL a really long time, and he's a practice squatter. I mean, that's essentially what he is. He's a guy who, if you get decimated by injuries at the wide receiver position, you bring in a guy like Tyler Johnson, because you want somebody who can run routes. You want somebody who knows where to be. You want somebody who can read coverages. But Tyler Johnson's not going to add like anything else. He doesn't have blazing speed that's going to make him accelerate past defenders. He's not a guy who's going to be dynamic after the catch. He's not going to be a guy who makes a lot of contested catches. He's not going to add a lot. He's essentially a guy who will get where he needs to be, and if he happens to be open, you'll throw him the football and he'll make a play. And I think the practice squad's a much better spot than the active roster. I think the active roster has to go to guys who are either going to help your team today, who have a chance to develop into more in the future, or guys who are special teams aces. And Tyler Johnson fits none of those roles. I think that the practice squad is a much better spot for him than the active roster, particularly with the presence of Reynolds, Lazard, and Gibson all on the active roster. Lander Wiegand is the international player the Jets brought in. He's from Germany. He's a guard. In fact, I think the Jets signed Wiegand with the idea that he would take the international spot on the practice squad. So this is kind of like a bonus spot the NFL created a few years back, because the NFL is trying to market the game internationally. So it's called the International Pathway Program. They bring in players who are from outside the U.S. Essentially, they dedicate one practice squad spot to each of them. And there actually have been some successful players who have come from this practice squad spot. So it's not inconceivable that Wiegand could develop into a player for this team. And then Jordan Clark, the son of Ryan Clark, the ESPN analyst, also makes the practice squad. So I wasn't super impressed with Jordan Clark during the preseason, but apparently the Jets were, and they gave him a practice squad spot. He's notable because he's the son of the analyst on ESPN, Ryan Clark. And the practice squad will continue to take shape over the next couple of days. You may see some changes, and players can be cut or added to the practice squad depending on who becomes available. We could see some more movement there. But for today, that's all. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast, let's give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, please give this episode a big thumbs up. And helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Send in your mailbag questions tomorrow. We're going to try and do a mailbag show. I look forward to answering your questions then. Talk to you Friday.